that, frame rater?
A blast from the past, a wonder of yesteryear. This is a jukebox. Surely you're aware of the term, but if you weren't alive 20 plus years ago, you might not know anything about it, how it works, or really what it's used for. Surely jukebox enthusiasts would take one look at this one and say, nope, that's not an authentic retro jukebox. While true that this isn't nearly as old as those from their prime days, the functionality and form remains pretty much identical. By definition, this is still a jukebox. And it isn't a new one either. I imagine this one is still relatively old. If you're unaware of what I'm speaking of here, this is a compact disc jukebox. A more modern media format, but still not new or anything. Upon doing some research into this particular model, I happened to notice myself a silver plate screwed to the back which said Nostalgia Gold 2 on it. If one were to look this up, they'd find out that this particular model was in development between 1994 to 1995, so still within the 1900s, and as such I believe we can reasonably classify this as retro. Now before taking a closer look into this particular jukebox, let's go on a historical flashback to what role these machines had many decades ago, and what started this whole phenomenon in the first place. In 1889, an at the time strange contraption was created by Louis Glass known as the Edison Class M electric phonograph, an extension to Thomas Edison's earlier invention simply titled the Phonograph in 1877. Louis Glass's idea to market this in local restaurants with his and William Arnold's phonograph technology molded what would eventually be called the jukebox. At the time, this jukebox would work by having listeners turn a crank which would read stylus and printed marks and reproduce it into what had been recorded. These recordings would generally be of music. The listeners would hear the music through a series of tubes connected to a box that would line directly into your ears. And as mentioned prior, this is what was at the time called the Edison Class M phonograph. Much as I'd love to say this also marks the invention of the headphones, those were introduced years prior in 1881 for telephone communication. So there's a more simplified history of the Jukebox Origins, but I think we can dig a little deeper. Not too long before Louis Glass marketed the contraption, the entire concept of playing back sound was entirely unheard of. This concept would first come to light in 1857 with the Phonautograph, roughly 20 years prior to the Phonograph. Au clair de la lune, as sung by Edouard Leon Scott de Martinville. And who knows if I'm saying that right. I decided to try speeding up the original clip without altering the pitch, and here's how that came out. But we'll never really know if it sounded even close to that in real life. With the technology being so primitive, it is potentially inaccurate. The Phonautograph was actually not designed to play back the sounds it had recorded. That evolution had to wait for Thomas Edison and his phonograph invention from 1877. However, members of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory were able to convert what was really just squiggly lines on a paper into the audio recording of Au clair de la lune we know today. Edouard patented the Phonautograph in 1857, demonstrating his creation 3 years later in 1860, or so the sources say. He died a bit over 20 years later at the age of 62. That is a recording of a man who has been deceased for over 140 years. Nobody alive on this planet today was around during his lifespan. This recording is one of the most important relics we have to technology of the past. To quote Emily Thompson's review on NPR.org, he wanted to understand how sounds work. He's part of a tradition of finding ways to render sound visible so that you could look at it and learn about it. And that I find truly inspiring. Unfortunately for Edouard, his accomplishment of the Phonautograph mostly went overshadowed by Edison's phonograph. This had Edouard convinced in his death that Edison stole his deserved claim to fame. I know this video is about jukeboxes, but I think we owe a moment to Edouard to acknowledge his outstanding accomplishment in a world that has mostly forgotten about him. It appears to be unknown whether the original Phonautograph used to record Au clair de la lune still exists or not, but in 1865 Joseph Henry of the Smithsonian Institute acquired many of Edouard's inventions for their museum. This one here seems to be the oldest Phonautograph which you can find actual photographs of. However, the original design documents seem to resemble a more octagonal shape. In 2008, an American audio historian of unknown identity located and donated many original Phonautograph papers from an archive of Edouard's work. This historian might be a man named David Giovannoni, as his name popped up rather frequently when looking into this. At the very least, he played a key role in restoring it. One quote from him reads, "Scott was basically saying, I want to photograph the voice. Imagine the once existing world where sound was but a mere concept such as the human soul. It's there, but you can't prove it exists. I don't know about you, but I personally find this to all overwhelm me with fascination and excitement." Bringing us back to the past, the 1930s to be precise, in this time period coin-operated phonographs were becoming more known. The Rudolf Wurlitzer company in 1934 would introduce what was called the 10 selection model P10. It had 10 knobs, each attributed to a 78 RPM record. A window on the top of the unit would demonstrate the selection for the player to choose between. The 10 selection model P10 may be the first of its kind to use multiple record technology. However, research about the history of jukeboxes is seldom found online with organization to its dates. Regardless, it was Wurlitzer's first. This innovation might be what ended up tossing the term coin-operated phonograph for a new one, being the jukebox. Or if you came from the south, you might remember it being called a juke joint. It's plausible that the term juke joint actually came first, as the word juke is representative of being disorderly, rowdy, or wicked. This juke joint would hypothetically create an environment of excitement and entertainment. There was a time some would use another name, the Nickelodeon. This was a term used to describe a rather small theater, in which the price of admission was just a nickel. Supposedly singer Teresa Brewer is responsible for the term being used regarding jukeboxes due to her 1950s single, Music, 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 in which she refers to it as such.
Come on everybody, put the nickels in, and keep that old Nickelodeon playing, and we'll have music all the time.
The term isn't really valid due to neither of these things costing a nickel anymore. Warner MX's introduction to the television channel known as Nickelodeon in 1977 has made the term feel entirely obsolete now outside of a historical perspective. The industry began to take exclusivity to the term jukebox in 1939 when Glenn Miller, a large name in music production at the time, was quoted using it in that year's Time magazine. To put Glenn Miller's work into scale, Time magazine noted at the time that of the 12 to 24 discs in each of today's 300,000 US jukeboxes, from 2 to 6 are usually Glenn Miller's. Whatever you would decide to call the thing, it would go on to become one of music and culture's biggest icons. Yet despite this, jukeboxes are seldom seen anymore. Imagine my shock when I came across this one while visiting a quaint breakfast diner with an excellently retro aesthetic. Initially, this was going to be a video on their jukebox and restaurant. The owners were all on board and even seemed excited, until they vanished off the face of the earth apparently, as I'm no longer able to get a hold of them. Here's to hoping I didn't scare them off somehow, though I'm not sure exactly how that could have happened. Something I did want to say about this place at the least is that its fate is as of yet uncertain. Supposedly, the jukebox here is going to be taken back to its amusements market, otherwise whatever place they had been renting it from. So no, this jukebox isn't actually theirs. All the money that went into it was divided and split profit-wise to the owner. How'd that happen? Well, I guess the technician would come to collect it and then do the splitting after opening the unit once retrieving the coin bucket. You know where I'm going with this? Yeah, they didn't have the key to open it. So most unfortunately, I can't go too in-depth with how the jukebox works or give you a rundown of its internals, but I do know a few things I'll try to visualize for you later. Before that, let's take in all we can from the exterior. This style of jukebox is known as the Wurlitzer Bubbler, weighing in at around 360 pounds, designed by Paul Fuller in 1946. Paul was an expert in jukebox technology who contributed to the jukebox legacy before and after this model had surfaced. He didn't actually give this model a name, nor did he to his earlier works. No, it wasn't until the 60s where he started using terminologies to separate models from one another. Supposedly, the term bubbler was given by operators and collectors, which somehow over time gave it the universal notoriety as the bubbler. There's no mistaking its style with that chromatic design, ascending bubbles, coining the term, and bright vivid colors. Well, on one of two sides, the bottom left side, these bubblers are supposed to light up on all four intersecting barberable pilasters, but one can only assume that this jukebox is not in tip-top shape. Perhaps this one had costed them less to rent as a result. The iconic look of the bubbler was once compared to the vehicles used by consumers in the mid-1950s by Raymond Louis, an industrial designer. Specifically, he referred to these vehicles as jukeboxes on wheels. The design of the bubbler is certainly a product of this time period. According to AntiqueWeek.com, more than 56,000 bubblers were sold in less than 2 years after its debut in 1946. Now a universal symbol for the jukebox term, it is in tandem the model of choice depicted by illustration and animation alike. Even to this day, when you think of a jukebox, chances are you're thinking of a bubbler. The original Model 1015 offered an entire 24 selections to choose from, which in 1946 was quite a big deal. However, the Seaberg Corporation's Select-O-Matic from 1949 brought with it the impressive technology of playing far more records than what was the standard, and more tunes means more selection. More selection means more variety. More variety means more appeal. More appeal means more interest. More interest means more plays. More plays means more revenue. Not only did the competition step up to the plate, but generally they were seen to overall be the better pieces of technology with of course more music, but also came with it more reliability. Wurlitzer didn't actually do anything to change the limitation until 6 years after their bubbler model, with the 1500 model, able to carry a total of 52 records. While still a no doubt stylish unit, Many considered the bubbler to be more visually appealing than the 1500. Perhaps as a result, eventually the bubbler model would be enhanced to hold more than its default 24. Further developments past the original bubbler model are hard to find documented online. Thus, I had been unable to pinpoint any dates of preceding bubbler models or which ones specifically would hold more records. Although in many cases, owners could simply buy a conversion kit from Wurlitzer to update their model to more modern standards. What's known for certain is that in the 1960s, jukeboxes began to suffer a bit of a decline, in part due to the home and portable solutions becoming more affordable. Take, for example, the portable radio and cassette tape deck. What this meant was that customers no longer needed to pay to get their favorite song blasting out, as long as they could carry around their own free solution, batteries not included. As a result of the decline, Wurlitzer dropped their production in 1974, allowing its German subsidiary to take over the production. Due to the demand, the division reintroduced the bubbler in 1986 with all those bells and whistles, like CD technology for example. Wurlitzer of Germany had been producing these jukeboxes until 2013 when the company had finally but sadly ceased its manufacturing. I suppose it's inevitable at some point, no good thing lasts forever. But there are still some, albeit limited, options to purchasing a jukebox in today's day and age. Your options are with AMI, Victrola, or Rockola, the latter of which I haven't heard too many good stories of, supposedly as they are prone to wear and tear. Victrola and Rockola seem to be your only options of getting a bubbler, at least to get one new from the factory they're built in. AMI does, however, appear to have a pretty neat arcade cabinet-esque style one called the NGX Infinity Jukebox, although I myself would still greatly prefer the bubbler any day. How about something a bit less spectacular but still pretty nifty, like this Victrola Mini Jukebox CD player that I picked up a year ago? Not to mention, the thing will cost you under $100, compared to a brand new Rockola bubbler jukebox which, at its cheapest price, will set you back just under 10 grand. Thankfully, there is an alternative, being Victrola's full-sized 3-speed turntable at $849. As of right now, they're sold out, and who knows when they'll go back into stock. In case you happen to be wondering, I'm not personally looking to buy one, it's not in my budget. I simply figured it would be smart to go through the options in case anyone was wondering. After all, they can make a room shine. So what would we call this jukebox I have in front of me here? This is what is known as an NSM Music branded Nostalgia Gold 2 jukebox. The company behind it, NSM Music, was actually acquired by AMI Entertainment Network as of this recent passing month of February. NSM Music was a Germany-based company that had been around since the 1950s, producing American-style jukeboxes for any and all occasions. So in reality, without the Wurlitzer stamp on it, this jukebox is about as official as they come. NSM Music's site now looks like a copy-paste job of AMI's own website. Like AMI, their selection is very modern. It doesn't appear as if any bubbler-style jukeboxes are available to purchase. Anywho, before attempting to document what's inside this jukebox, let's take a gander at what we actually can see. Keep in mind, while still rather primitive to today's standards, this jukebox is far more modern than the Wurlitzer 1015, but the concept and in many ways execution remains the same. It should also be noted that this remaining portion of the video will be in first person, and no longer of a documentary style since a lot of what I had to work with resulted in some guesswork. There may be some inaccuracies from this point on, though the concepts alone should be enough to provide you with an, at least somewhat accurate walkthrough. First things first, I'll put in a loonie, since this model was configured for that specifically. Seems by default it would take $1 and $5 American bills. I tried myself with a $5, but the slot seems to be deactivated. $1 would get you 3 plays, meaning 3 tracks to choose from, or $5 would get you 18 plays. What you see me doing in this footage is making a selection after putting in the loonie. See these albums located just behind this window here? These are our choices. We can scroll through them by moving the knob. This knob controls a pin. Notice how when I move the knob, the pin stays put, but once I apply pressure to the knob, the pin sticks outwards. By then moving the knob in a direction once pressed into an album slot, you can see what's available on the following album. Swapping between these has no technical function whatsoever. It's entirely for you to identify what track is associated with each 2-digit number that you'll set on the keypad to make your selection. If you mess up while putting in the number, just press the C button to clear it. You would first put in the number listed on the bottom left or right of the album to specify the album. Then you would put in the track number as listed. It was really easy as that. Then your track of choice will begin to play through the interior speakers. There's even the incorporation of a subwoofer, as seen towards the bottom on the back of the unit. Some models could even have wallboxes, which were like ringers you'd use to call in your waitress at the dinner table, but instead these would interact with the functions of the jukebox. Being an idea based on wiring though, I imagine a first-time install and setup would at the very least be tedious. Depending on the model, some bubbler jukeboxes can send multiple speakers anywhere within cord's reach using its 70-volt powering system, giving energy to these externals all from one base unit. This would make the music audible in more than one room, or if large enough, other sides of the room. This might be a more modern addition to the model, as according to the sources I came across, this unit is capable of just 50 volts. Regardless, if that 70-volt system is capable of providing what is essentially a modern setup, then why do we no longer see these around at local restaurants? There's a handful of reasons, some of which we've glossed over earlier, but multiple others as well. While I'm sure there's some pocket change to make off user requests, the profit all in all would be minimal at best considering maintenance costs versus the amount of people who'd really care to sink their cash into it. People are always on the run these days as well. Not so often do you find families sitting to eat a meal at your local fast food joint anymore. In many cases, these restaurants have loitering limits as well. A majority of these places probably wouldn't want you around long enough to get through 18 tracks. Also consider that it's a lot less work to just use a radio, a playlist stream from a phone, or a PC. This is of course in similar fashion to the cassettes of the 60s that caused the decline of the jukebox in the first place. This elimination was fairly inevitable with technology. The modern solutions wouldn't limit you to the same tracks nor the same genres provided in the jukebox. Taking up the extra space for one of these just isn't reasonable in modern day, unless your intent is, like this restaurant, to give off a distinctly retro feel. In such a case, you'll still need to rely on the jukebox's functions, like for example once deciding that you've had enough of the current song, you can press H to either pause it, or press it twice to go to the next selection. I'm a bit curious myself to what all these numbers just below the knob mean. Perhaps this display was busted as I couldn't find rhyme or reason to what was being shown. Additionally, sometimes the numbers would be changing, other times it would stay still. I believe something was wrong here, but I can't prove anything. I'm sure you're wondering how the jukebox itself actually works. There's no operating system here, just craftsmanship. Thanks to the special multiple CD loading mechanism swapping between physical albums, it's as easy as pressing a button. Take a look at it working in slow motion and you can pretty easily make out what's going on here. Once an album's number is selected, the mechanism picks out the CD and drops it onto the player below, which boots it up and plays the track associated with the number selection you input. In many ways, this is just a glorified CD player which happens to hold, in this case, a total of 60 albums at the ready. Traditional jukeboxes from the earlier days behave fairly similar. In this video by YouTuber Uncle Doug, you can see how it worked on the original thing. Slower, but the concept remains nearly identical. Again, I can't confirm directly, but generally when it comes to the bubbler, the actual bubbling effect is created by a heated resistor which warms a plate suited up against the bubble tubes you see on the exterior, which causes the bubbles to rise through the tubes. Regarding the rest of what's in here, there's gears, there's pulleys, there's quite a few things to a more technical perspective, but I don't really have the resources in which to explain it properly. Again, no key available, so opening it just wasn't an option. But take it from me, the internals are a beautiful fusion of electrical engineering and craftsmanship. Hopefully what we've already addressed is what's most interesting to you. There are a few other videos showing the internals on YouTube which you'll have to resort to for a more in-depth look at this machinery. Since we haven't looked yet, here's the back of the jukebox. Besides the several vents for airflow, you've got 2 volumes and a reject button. The reject button simply puts all current operations to a halt. To put it simply, the song stops. Additionally, this will remove the current album from the mechanism, placing it back into the correct idle slot. There's also this input here for an internet cable. From what data I could find online, this is part of a conversion kit that allowed information on included MP3 tracks to be updated, in which said information would then display on the display. Jukeboxes capable of handling MP3s seem to rely on a computer system in replacement for the typical internals of a jukebox. That said, all the other signs pointed to this being an authentic, retro-style piece of hardware, so I'm not really sure what this was for. As far as I know, this unit doesn't even make use of MP3s at all. Maybe it's a leftover from a previous project that was later decided against. Still, it sticks out of the unit, so you'd figure it's there for some reason. The only other thought I have is to fetch album-related info, so long as this machine has the capability of doing so. However, I believe it doesn't. Otherwise, I'm fairly clueless about this, so perhaps the comments below can be of some help with this one. And that's basically the gist of it. The jukebox will always hold a special place in my heart for its beautiful presentation, though besides its visual aesthetic, it really doesn't have a place in our modern era, other than the convenience of a multi-loading CD mechanism, although similar, far smaller devices have already come to pass in the home market, and are now frequently found at thrift stores. The jukebox may majorly reside in our past now, but for being such a huge icon that changed the industry, and technology as a whole, we can't deny its prominence to history. For some of the more acute research in this video, I'd like to thank the following sources: Carol Gantz of IndustrialDesignHistory.com and TomZone.jukeboxhistory.info. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you lovely frame raiders in the next video.